retired four-star General Stanley McChrystal. He has a new book, Risk: A User's Guide, and that's something the general knows a lot about. He had a long military career, including a commander of U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2010. For the past 10 years, he runs the McChrystal Group, a corporate consulting company. Good morning, Stanley. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Now, we'll get to your book in a moment. Let's start with Afghanistan, though. Top military officials, they said they recommended leaving a small force in Afghanistan, which is a contradiction to what President Biden wanted to do. Should they have done things differently?
Well, it's a tough decision. You remember the Doha Agreement, negotiated by President Trump's administration, said we would pull every American soldier out. So President Biden was left with the decision either to abrogate that agreement or to confirm it. He actually delayed it, but then made the decision to go through with the withdrawal. And I think the assessment was the Taliban, who had held off attacking Americans during that 18-month period, wouldn't have stopped doing that. So it was a tough call. Had I made the decision, or I had been asked to recommend, I probably would have left a residual American force. But I was emotionally wrapped up in the mission. I spent a long time there, and I'm free to admit I'm biased.
That's an important acknowledgement, an interesting one, and actually brings us to the book. But I do want one more question on Afghanistan. Keeping a force there, the argument would be that prevents al-Qaeda from making a resurgence. Are you concerned, or are we capable of keeping al-Qaeda out of power, or out of a powerful situation in the country without being there?
It's difficult, but the reality is global terrorist groups like al-Qaeda or ISIS can go a lot of places. So Afghanistan is not unique in that standpoint. They could operate from Pakistan or somewhere else. So I don't think it hugely increases the threat to the United States homeland. My reason for leaving forces would be partly that, but the other reason is I think we have a relationship with the Afghan people. I think they had a chance. Now, they've struggled and they've made a lot of mistakes. But I actually think that they have an opportunity to build a nation. And even going forward, I don't think that opportunity's dead. So I'm much more about the long-term strategic partnership.
You know the area very well, General. And as you watch this unfold, did you think that there was any way that it could have gone, that it could have worked, that the plan could have worked the way it was executed? Did you see that?
The withdrawal?
Yes.
Well, I think it certainly could have.
It could have.
It was a decision to try to get American forces out with as little risk as possible, so to use speed. The fact that the defense forces of the Afghan military collapsed so quickly, it could have been predicted, but it wasn't assured. It might have happened, it didn't. It was a pretty effective information warfare campaign that the Taliban had been mounting for a long time. And so I don't think it was shocking that that happened, but you know, that's operations like that are that way. A certain amount of it's fate.
And there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, a lot of what we should have done, we could have done, why didn't we do? And I don't know if that's necessarily fair.
Well, I think, you know, you put people on the field, coaching the team or playing, it feels very different.
Yeah.
And so I would say, you know, now, it didn't go perfectly.
Now, in your book, you say one of the biggest changes after 9/11 was how intelligence community shares information. So does it surprise you how fast the Taliban took over?
Not really. If you watch the trend of history from about 2010 on, the United States was constantly signaling that we were going to get out as soon as we could. And then that sped up with the Doha Agreement. So the Afghan people started to calculate, wow, this is very dangerous. They lacked full confidence in their own government for some good reasons. And so I think what happened is a crisis of confidence just came to a head when we started the final pullout, and so things collapsed pretty quickly.
So I love how you started your book. You started with, you may remember how it started, and you go into a scenario about a Chicago tourist returning from China who's carrying this virus. As it turns out, you were working on this book before COVID-19. This was an exercise that really didn't happen. What did you learn from this?
Well, you're right. We started
I thought
the book.
It was so spot on, Stanley, for something that really came to be.
We started the book on risk, and then COVID-19 started, and it seemed to play out what we were thinking, which our conclusion early on was the greatest risk to us is us.
Is us, yeah.
And so we found out about COVID-19, or Crimson Contagion, which was conducted in 2019, and it's a Department of Health and Human Services exercise, and it has a scenario remarkably like what played out in COVID-19. And it told us that we were not sufficiently prepared.
We were not ready at all.
That's right, and we weren't coordinating well. And then when COVID-19 came, even though we had the lessons from just months before, we made every one of those mistakes again.
I mean, managing risk is arguably the central challenge of life and the central challenge for any country. You say we all have a risk immune system. Can you define that and talk about the factors?
Exactly. I would say first is we have this fixation on external risks. All the things out there are going to get us.
Right.
But when we look at when companies fail, for example, it's almost always internal problems. We have a human immune system, and every day we are assaulted by what they predict is 10,000 microorganisms, any one of which could make us sick or kill us. And yet we don't get up in the morning worried about it because this miracle system detects those threats, assesses them as dangerous or not, responds to them, destroys the ones that must, and learns from it. Sort of the principle of vaccination. Only when our immune system is weakened are we suddenly vulnerable to things. Well, we have risk immune systems in our organizations, and I would argue in our wider society. And when that risk immune system is weakened or doesn't function well, suddenly things which really shouldn't cause us huge problems. COVID-19, for example, is not an amazingly 10 feet tall, unbeatable virus.
Right.
We knew what to do about it. We knew it was coming, and we got this miracle vaccine in record speed. And yet still, we struggle. We struggle because our risk immune system is weakened.
Yeah.
And that risk immune system, we define 10 factors, risk control factors: communication, narrative, diversity, bias, timing, action. Number of those, and all of those operate as a system. And if we keep that healthy, and we can do that, we have agency over that. So risk is not always something terrible to us. It's also an opportunity to be more resilient.
And it's how we handle it. You say you chose a soldier's life because you like taking risk. What does that say about you?
Well, when I was young, I looked at people who were timid, and I decided I didn't want to be that. And so
didn't want to be timid.
I went into a line of business where I thought I would be taught and forced to take on risk. And also, to be honest, you like the idea of being viewed as someone who's a risk taker, be viewed as the bold.
Of course.
And it becomes self-reinforcing.
It's a great book and application that we can use on many areas of our life. Thank you so much, General Stanley McChrystal. Risk, a User's Guide, on sale right now.
Very kind.